We're coming very closely to the end of Lent, and tonight we celebrate or we remember the day that we call Maundy Thursday. That's the day that Jesus does have this Last Supper with his disciples, which is the time that Jesus, according to John's Gospel, is having this last conversation with his disciples. That's been the topic of the last few devotionals that we've done. Well, today, I wanted to talk about what is really the very last word that Jesus says to his disciples before or really during the time when he's arrested. So what's happening here in this story, and by the way, I've cleverly named this Peace Part 2 because last time was Peace Part 1. It's a very different kind of peace. Anyway, what's happening in this story is that Jesus has just finished this time of gathering with his disciples for that Last Supper, that last meal. And then he leaves and he goes out to the garden to pray. And I think at this point, Jesus himself is really dealing with what he talked to the disciples about. I think what Jesus is dealing with at this point is he needs to have that inner peace that he had just talked to the disciples about. And so he goes to his God in prayer, and he begins to ask for strength to be able to walk through what he knows is about ready to happen. Because he knows that the anger that has built around Jesus' message that challenged the status quo of the religious people at the time, he knows that this is going to lead to his arrest and his eventual death and crucifixion. So I think he goes to the garden and he's praying for God to give him that inner peace that he knows is possible. And I think God does, in fact, pour that strength down upon Jesus in that moment. What's happened is one of Jesus' disciples has decided that he doesn't want to put up with Jesus' message anymore. And he goes to the religious authorities and he wants to turn him over. I've always thought that Judas does this because he really wants Jesus to strike out against Rome. He wants Jesus' anger to build so much that he strikes out, because Judas is a zealot, and zealots at that time really felt it was their duty, their religious duty actually, to kill any Roman guards that they might find a chance to kill. And so Judas, because he feels that Jesus has just missed the boat, because Jesus will not allow his righteous anger against Rome to build up, he goes and he turns him over to the Jewish authorities, who want to put him to death as well, for a completely different reason perhaps than what Rome would want to do away with Jesus. So in that moment, while he's in the garden, Judas comes up and he gives Jesus a kiss on the cheek, and then the religious guards who are there, they take Jesus and they're going to arrest him. Now, there's a weird moment in John's Gospel where those who are arresting Jesus somehow recognize Jesus' authority, because they ask, "Are you him?" And he said, "I am." And they realize that he's using the term that would refer to God. And they even at one point kneel down to Jesus. But that's not going to work. The anger continues to build. And eventually Jesus is ready to give himself over. Simon Peter at that moment pulls a sword and he cuts off the ear of one of those arresting officers. And Jesus restores that arresting officer's ear, but more importantly, he says this. He says, "Put away your sword. Put your sword back in its sleeve. Am I not to drink the cup that my Father has given me?" It's that last line in this story that really struck home to me. Because remember, the reason I think that Judas betrays Jesus is because Jesus is not angry enough to grab a sword and fight against the Romans. And here Peter is trying to do that thing that Judas actually wanted Jesus to do all along, but Jesus says no. There is a kind of peace that does not always make sense in our world. It's not pacifism. It's something much bigger than that. It recognizes that God ultimately is in control of all that we do. And Jesus seems to understand that God needs him to walk this path and allow the anger of the mob to come down upon him so that he can show the power of God is actually able to defeat the power of anger and hate. And in the resurrection, that's what the power of God does. But unless Jesus walks down this path and allows all of the hate and anger of the world to be poured down upon him on the cross, that message of hope beyond that anger is not going to be made. Jesus allows himself to go to the cross, yes, so that our sins are forgiven, but actually so the sins of the world are forgiven. And the sins of the world, in this case, in this gospel, seem to be centered on the idea of solving our problems through violence. Remember, Jesus said to his disciples, "They will know you are my disciples by the way you love one another." Not by the way you fight, but the way you love one another. And Jesus is able to, all the way to the end, show that he will not allow his anger to be the thing that guides him. That's a challenging last word. And it's a challenging last word for all of us. I think it was an especially challenging last word for Peter. And probably for Judas, who was looking on as well, wondering, when is Jesus going to be angry enough that he's going to take up sword? Jesus never got there. It's a challenge for us to remember the peace of Christ that came to bring us that inner peace, but also challenge us to find other ways to make our message known in the world.